If you struggle to get onto things like X, Spotify, ChatGPT yesterday, well, that's because network provider Cloudflare had a flare-up, and some tech problems meant that services took a while to recover. Let's hear from Rowan O'Donoghue speaking to me earlier. He's the Chief Innovation Officer and co-founder at Origina.
I guess in short, an internet technology company called Cloudflare, and a name which many people would not be familiar with, but yet one of the major infrastructure partners that kind of sits underneath a huge portion of the internet. Quite simply, they had a technical failure. And in turn, that meant that everything from booking airline travel, which I tried to do today, to online shopping, to even ordering your McDonald's cheeseburger in the kiosk at the store was affected and offline. And I think what we know so far, I think the outage was for about 3 or 4 hours before the team there identified what the problem was. But quite simply, it was a software configuration issue that exploded in size, and it just took out a huge portion of their network, which caused a lot of these outages for websites, what we've seen over the last couple of hours.
We hear a lot of this, that it was a configuration issue. There's not much resilience in the system when this happens. And bearing in mind that we're told to switch to new technology for this, that, and the other, an app for this, an app for that, it doesn't help when the system is not robust and resilient enough to deal with a configuration issue.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. I think the mind sometimes is drawn to, this is probably a big cyber attack or a hack, when in reality, most of the time, it is either an upgrade that went wrong or a change to the environment that wasn't tested properly. But I think it demonstrates the fragility of both the control systems in place, but also I think it highlights the dependency, as you say, that we've just been conditioned that these systems are safe. These are nice platforms, and for the most part they are, but that when there is an outage, we realize how little we are in control. And the impact it can have across the globe.
It's interesting you say about, was this a hack? A lot of people go straight to X to see if anybody else is having a similar problem, but you couldn't do that today. People go to Down Detector. Down Detector was down. So it must have been very isolating for people. Their usual sources of information to discover what the problem was weren't feeding them any detail.
Yeah, I think when something like this happens, it does. I mean, they are the typical areas that people go to try and figure out what the problem is. And I think, listen, I mean, I'm just back from Sweden last week, where this is a big concern amongst organizations. You know what I mean? It's a bit like when there's an outage, it kind of highlights the fragility of, I guess the industry. There's this illusion that we are in control, but really we're not. And I must admit, I mean, even over 30 years in the IT industry, you hear, we've seen organizations say, oh yeah, we have our backups in place and we can recover, but they never test them until there's an outage, and then they go to test it and it never works. And I think it just goes to show how exposed we really are. But it's not always a malicious or a bad actor. Sometimes it's really just something so simple as a configuration change or a piece of software.
But what can be done to make the system more robust and resilient so that, we are not affected like this? We live our lives through our devices.
I think the key thing is, listen, let's be honest. I mean, outages will always happen, right? You just can't eliminate them. But what you can avoid is being taken down by someone else's outage, right? And I think the key here is to, particularly for designing computer systems, is not to rely on a single vendor for critical functions, right? They should, and I think the key step to that is, as I say to many organizations, you really need to map out what that dependency look like. If you provide web services, like who are the cloud providers, who's behind them, what are the security layers? Ask the question, if the provider goes down for an hour, is my business going to go with it? What's the impact of that? And if the answer is yes to any of that, you've got a sovereignty problem. And I think, best practice always kind of taught us that, good architecture means having fallback paths, alternative providers. So when something like this happens, you have resilience built in and you're not affected by it. So, and I think the key message here is you don't have to abandon these companies. These are good companies, but you need to take control and design systems so you're choosing your dependency. You know what those dependencies are, and not that you're inheriting them from someone else and also inheriting